Japanese Deba, white Scirocco steel, very soft, hardcore. Some skin off here. Okay, this is the knuckle. This is the piece. The incision here. Okay, and then over here. Okay. Typically, I like to go, it doesn't matter which way you do it, I like to cut around. To cut around, and then do the knuckle on that. Cut through. Okay. And then you do the front knife, hold back the knife, you've got this guy, take the knife off. And here, you still have the knuckle. With the knuckle. Okay. Take your knife, your tip, score in. Okay. So nice little score to the bone. Okay. Then I go on the other side and I score. And I drag my knife. Okay. I drag my knife. And all I'm doing is just rolling my knife. Okay. Once you get down to here, cut in, and you can scrape if you want, and you cut across. And I like to leave that knuckle. You can pull it out if you don't want it. Let's see, check your skin. It's right here. Check your skin. Nice chicken. Okay. However you wish. So there we go. Back after a little break. Hey guys, Ricky here. Just kidding. All right. 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, YouTube. Welcome back to my channel, JPM.cuisine. Back at you with another knife review. This is kind of like an unknown brand for most. I saw these knives on Facebook. I saw a few sponsored posts by them on Facebook. Started following them. I reached out to them and wanted to try out a couple knives, and they sent me a few to try. The first one is the 180 millimeter Deba Bocho. This one suffered a minor accident, maybe a major accident. Suffered an accident in shipping where it was either dropped or thrown or something, and then because it was only in a padded envelope within, since this box was in a padded envelope, the tip protruded through the cardboard here, and when it hit the ground or whatever it did, it broke the tip. So sad for the knife. I can probably fix it. It is the harder steel. I think they're rated at a hardness of 62 or 63, and it definitely chipped instead of bending, so that's a good sign of the hardness. But many of you have probably seen boxes like these if you've ordered knives from Japan or Japanese style knives. I think this is a fairly common box. It doesn't really indicate the brand, I believe. I don't speak Japanese. Maybe one of you guys do, and you can tell me what it says. Love to know. But this is the 180 millimeter. We're going to talk about the 165 today. So this is a company called Syosaku-Japan. I think the website is Syosaku-Japan.com. I'll leave the link to it in the description so you don't have to worry about it here. But they offer a ton of handmade Japanese knives. And so I wanted to try out a couple handmade Japanese knives because, you know, on the forums and everything of that nature, these are supposedly where it's at. It's also kind of hard to determine whether or not there's a good one versus a bad one online because of, you know, there's so many clones and copycats out there. And so with this being a newer company, you never are sure. I just wanted to try them out and see what I thought. So we'll go at it like that. I'm not a Japanese knife expert. I'm not a Deba expert. I am fairly new to the Debas, although I've used them in the past. I know that they are designed specifically for filleting fish, No question about that. And I know that they're not designed for some of the tasks that I use them on. I'm okay with that because for me, a unitasker knife, in the States specifically, we're not doing a lot of fish filleting. And so a Deba is probably not going to be a knife that most of us are going to own or seek out unless we're really doing a lot of fish filleting. So let that be the premise of today's episode. Okay, so this is the Deba, the 165 millimeter Deba from Syosaku-Japan. And if you can notice, I've used it, I've done some testing with it. Japan, they are very focused on specialization, especially in their tools, and so there are very few all-purpose. Maybe the Santoku might be more of an all-purpose type knife, but the Deba is definitely not one. And if you guys can see, I don't know if you can see, but I've got some chips in mine because I was making some chicken stock after I started deboning some thighs, and I wanted to see if this would work well within bones, and that steel is very hard and very brittle, and so you will get chipping using it in bones. That's what's supposed to happen. And so that is why they do not recommend using it for chicken if you're going to be using it on bones. Now that doesn't mean you can't, use it to debone chicken thighs and things of that nature like I've used it. You just don't want to try and chop up the bones and go through bones with this because the steel is very brittle. It's hard. Okay, so there's a few Japanese terms I want to throw out just so you're aware. You can do your own research. I'll leave some links for you guys to do some searching if you're really interested or wanting to find out more. But this right here is a Deba bocho. I think bocho means knife, and the Deba is the traditional Japanese fish filleting knife for filleting fish and taking apart seafood and things of that nature. It is a very stout knife with a thick spine, similar to a bone cleaver that you guys may have in your repertoire, but this right here is not for cutting through bones. It's really for using the tip to go through the skin and then to get clean cuts because of that single bevel, and then you use it really to just remove the fillets from the fish and then maybe cut through the cartilage on the bone, on the spine, in order to use that for stocks and stuff. The next thing is Syosaku-Japan. Syosaku doesn't have a meaning. I reached out to the owner, asked him for some background. Wasn't really much that they could give me in terms of the naming. So it just sounds Japanese, and that's probably just a marketing thing. These knives are handmade in Sakai, Japan. Not Seki City like we normally see, but Sakai, Japan. And apparently a lot of knives from Japan are handmade in Sakai. I don't know which company or manufacturer or the actual knife maker, but that's what they list. And so I'm taking their word for it. This is a Scirocco. That means white steel. And this is number 2. And we're talking about specifically the center type steel or the steel that's used for the edge. It is a very common steel. It's, I believe white steel number 1 is the hardest with the most carbon, and so it is prone to more chipping, but it has a better edge retention. Number 3 has less, so it's a little bit softer, and number 2 is kind of in the middle, and so edge retention isn't as great as number 1, but it is the most common. Okay, and then we have a D-shaped Magnolia style handle. This is Magnolia and water buffalo horn. Very common to find that kind of style of knife in Japan, or at least those handles. And then we're looking at what they call an awase bocho, which means some form of cladding of a softer steel to the harder steel in order to give it some flexibility. And I've tried this on a file. It doesn't feel like it is very hard at all. I would say maybe like a 10 or so versus the edge, which is much harder. And so typically there are 3 types of awase. There's sanmai, which means 3-layer. My MX3s are all sanmai. There's warakomi, which is similar to sanmai. And then there's nimai, which typically applies to single bevel type knives where the cladding is only on the one side in the spine, and typically there's no cladding here because the steel is exposed. I don't know if that's the case here, but that brings me to the first issue that I'll address later. But there is a chip or a fracture. I'm sorry, not a chip, but a fracture in my knife. And since these are handmade, they usually take a couple of months to make a new one. That is not necessarily a fatal flaw because this isn't a cleaver, but that is a flaw that I wanted to make note of. Okay, a few more terms. We have the jigane, which is the soft steel, and then the hagane, which is the harder, shinier metal or steel that's used for the edge. And then typically you may hear it referred to as a katsumi. That usually talks about the sharpening finish, where you have sort of that misty look from the softer cladding compared to the mirror finish on the harder steel. And then again, there's the urutsuki, or you may be pronouncing it urusuki. This is the concave finish here, which allows you to get a ridge here, a sort of a plateau here and here, that you're going to use when you're sharpening in order to make a very thin straight edge. Now, this is concave in order to allow for it to pass through flesh really cleanly, because only this part of the surface is actually dragging on the flesh or whatever you're cutting. And since this is concave, basically it's a divot, it allows you to have an air pocket here. Okay, and so those are the main terms that we're going to be talking about. I'll leave them up on the screen at some point probably, or at least in the description, so you guys can read up there. Okay, so back to the knife. This is the 165 millimeter Deba. They offer 3 styles of Deba. 150 millimeter, which is $150. The 165 millimeter, which is $170. And then the 180 millimeter, which is currently out of stock, but that's $200. Okay, so these are not inexpensive knives. I don't know how they rate compared to knives that you might find on Japanese or Japanese knife imports or something like that. But this is its own company. They have their own website. I think you can find them on Amazon if you look, but typically if you're going to order these knives, you go through their website. Okay, and so just a quick specs on this one. We're looking at 165 millimeters or 6.5 inches. We're talking about 245 grams. We have a 7 millimeter thickness on the spine, and then a 49.61 millimeter height, just under 50. And again, it is the white steel number 2 with the D-shape Magnolia handle. Okay, these are handmade, and so somebody makes them by hand and then they sharpen them by hand. Now there's a few claims on the website talking about razor sharpness. Both of mine were not razor sharp out of the box. They definitely needed to be touched up, and I think that's typically the norm when you order a Japanese knife or you buy a Japanese knife, especially a professional knife, is that you're, as the chef, are going to put the final finish or the final sharpness on your knife before you use it. In this case, I let the owner know, and he told me I was probably using it incorrectly or trying to cut paper incorrectly or something like that, where I wasn't skilled enough to do so. And I didn't want to argue with him or go back and forth about it, but he says that these are supposed to be razor sharp, and he trusts his craftsmen 100%, even over any kind of feedback that he might get regarding the sharpness of this knife. And these knives were not razor sharp to what I would call razor sharp. I put an edge on them. They were razor sharp after that. They cut through paper, magazine paper, whatever it was. They cut through tomatoes. They did everything that I wanted them to do after I sharpened them. And so with this knife, you don't necessarily need it to be razor sharp, because it's going to be cutting through thick items, and having a razor sharp edge or a very thin edge is going to make it even more susceptible to chipping and bending. And so be careful of that whenever you're working on this knife. Now, the other thing is the 2 types of steel. You can see where they meet right here. This is the soft one, is the hazy, and then the mirror polish. Since these are high carbon, they can patina a bit. And when you store them, you may want to put some oil on them just to make sure that they don't rust, because these are not stainless steel. And then here is the part I wanted to talk about, that big crack that I have. It kind of goes along with this little, yeah, and these marks are from me testing it to see how sharp or how strong it is, to see what the hardness is of the centerpiece, to make sure if it's a Nimai or if it is a Sanmai or Warikomi. And I don't believe this is a Nimai, where this is the same steel as the edge, because the scratches were made pretty easily using some other type of, primarily also what I do is clean it up to see if this was either some kind of laminate or something, and this is actually a crack. It catches both ways, so I'm fairly certain that's a crack within the knife. And so when you invest $170 on a knife like this, to find a crack in it isn't ideal, especially when it takes 2 months for these to replenish. And so those are some major points to consider when buying any Japanese knife or any handmade knife, is the fact that you are potentially going to run into some flaws. If you've ever seen Forged in Fire, I know that's a funny show. They do have some good things that you can pull out of there, but typically whenever they try to quickly produce knives within an hour or within the 3-hour time limit, they typically have a ton of chips or fractures and things within the knife, delamination. And so these are supposed to take their time and not necessarily have them, but it is possible. Okay, well, that right there is my quick review of the Syosaku-Japan Debas. I don't know if I'll be able to review any more of these. I didn't have a falling out with the owner, but no. it didn't seem like we were really open to some of the feedback that I had, and so I just wanted to be transparent with you guys and upfront. I'm not going to call them out as being a fake knife manufacturer or anything like that. I'm not out to go onto websites and deem them as being scams or whatever. I want to get the knife in my hand. I want to try it, and remember, these things are just designed for cutting. Unfortunately, with a Deba, it is designed primarily for filleting fish, and not a lot of us are going to be doing that on a day-to-day basis. And so, it's not necessarily something I'd recommend that you have in the kitchen. Of course, I have tested the Mercer, and for the price of that one, what you get and the utility in it, it makes more sense to me now as an investment versus spending maybe $170 to $200 on a Japanese style knife that you may not use for that purpose at all. Okay, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that you guys gained some information from here. Any feedback that you have, especially pertaining to Japanese knives and things of that nature, I'm always welcome to hear. Lastly, I wanted to announce the 2 winners. I'm going to reach out to them specifically, but our 2 winners are HBLIX 2007, HBLIX 2007, and we have W. Miller. And you guys are going to be winning the Victorinox and the Mercer. So you're going to get one of these per person. And I think HBLIX is getting the Mercer, and I think W. Miller is getting the Victorinox. I have to double check, but I'll reach out to you guys. I just need your shipping addresses, and then we'll go from there. But thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I've got a lot more stuff coming from Dowstrong, and so I'm going to work on those videos and get those published. We're going to be looking at a lot of Sujihikis and even their new obliterator. And so those things are going to be coming up really soon. Stay tuned to this channel. Remember to subscribe. I've got a Patreon if you guys want to check that out. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.